Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi guys, welcome to our next training webinar with Steve Leo. I'm going to unmute you all just in case you have questions, but just keep in mind if you're in a noisy setting, please keep yourself muted. But that being said, I will pass it over to Steve for him to start.
Okay, how you guys doing today? Everybody's doing well? I guess nobody's going to comment.
Doing well.
Yep. There we go. All right, so today we're going to talk about linear speed. Going to kind of go over obviously what we do, but I'm going to try to also just give you some other things to think about. It all relates to what we've been teaching, but maybe just a different way to look at things and get a little more in depth on how to break some things down when it comes to linear speed. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about, acceleration, top speed, are they that much different? I think a lot of times, especially with our classes, we look at acceleration and top speed and view them as two totally different animals. And then a lot of people look at top speed or max velocity training as something that's complicated and hard. And I want you to just look at it from a different lens and understand that the application of force and what's really happening from the hip, knee, and ankle is not really that much different when a kid is running. And even we could even throw here and change direction. If you were on my last call, I believe it was last month, we talked about getting the slack out and getting the extension at the hip. It's going to be the same thing here. We're going to really try to go over that and really understanding what those movements are. Once you get that, it really doesn't really matter what drill you do. It's just a matter of what you need to get out of that kid. And we all know every kid's a little bit different. So a couple concepts I want to go over. Number one is posture control. Michael Johnson, if you know anything about him, he had unbelievable posture. Some people would say he kind of arched his back a little. That was really just more his bone structure if you really look at it. But he kept an unbelievable posture with his upper body, which then allowed him to maintain stability if you look at it through his hip and through his torso region, which later on then would allow greater mobility at the hip. One of the issues we have is we want kids to apply force, but they lack the mobility at the hip on the front side mechanic to allow them to apply that force into the ground. And then the last part really is that ground negotiation, allowing them to negotiate and hit the ground properly. So if you look at the lower part of the leg here on a lot of the athletes, they're weak when they strike the ground. So it's almost like having a weak fist or a weak wrist. If you're trying to punch somebody, if that's not very strong, we're not going to be able to apply as much force. So a lot of our kids, we know, struggle when we get down here. We talk all the time about posture, and I know some of the old coaching cues are, glutes get tight or pull the belly button, and all that stuff we've heard for millions of years. To be honest, I don't use any of those anymore. It does not work with kids. They don't have that much in tune with their bodies. Part of what we have to do with a lot of the drill work is get them to be in those more erect stances and get them to apply force. So when they do, they feel these muscles stabilizing and feeling the mobility at the hip, especially when they're striking the ground and getting that push off. And when you're striking the ground hard with that lower shank, that will also allow their hips to get higher. And when their hips get up higher, now they're going to be in a better, postural control. So we want to make sure that when we're doing that, they're applying as hard as they can. Okay. All right. So movement prep, it's not about just doing a active warm up. I know we think about that all the time, and put a little Jean-Claude Van Damme in there because he was Mr. Flexible. I look at ADW as movement prep, getting them ready to apply force, getting them ready to decelerate, getting them ready to whatever your core lift for that day. Maybe it's a squat or a deadlift. So really start thinking, even though we're still going to call it our active warm-up, still look at it more as movement prep. And if you read any books or if you read any literature when it comes to preparing for activity, and it could be anything, could be playing a sport, whatever, it really is movement prep. And our warm-up, we know, serves a lot of different roles, which is great. But I want you to look at it from the perspective, when you're doing a linear speed warm-up, that the movements really hopefully will map back to what you're going to do later on in your session. So if you're doing, and these aren't bad drills, but if you're doing a lot of sideways movements or karaoke or things like that, that may not necessarily map back to what you're trying to accomplish that day. Again, they're not bad, and I wouldn't say never do them, because they do work on the lateral hips and wake up the muscles, and we get all that. But we know sometimes we're tight on time, and especially if you have a large group, I would really focus more on the linear, and that is in both directions, forward and backwards. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, and just maybe give you a couple other concepts to work with and see what really affects the kids. Because really, we want to see, whenever we give a kid a drill, the drill is not the skill. We want to see how do they respond to it? How do their muscles respond? How do their joints respond? And we know every kid is different, right? Some kids get it right away. They're motor learning geniuses and they get it immediately. And then we know we have other kids that as soon as they do any type of drill, they spaz out. And sometimes it's your best athletes that can't do the drills because for them, they're almost naturally fast. And sometimes just letting them sprint more and giving them less instruction is better. I myself, and I know my guys, John, Vicky, Nick, Joe up in Sparta, I know it sounds weird, we've been getting away from teaching so much. I know that may sound kind of weird, but we're trying to just coach them through more drills and giving them less to think about, giving them one thing to think about. So if you think about that in the warm-up, when you do one warm-up drill, say it's just a skipping movement, that's a good time to just work on one particular aspect, whether it be a posture. So when we talk about, skipping with the hands behind the back or in the overhead position or things like that, that's focusing on one area. So you want to think about that when you're going through these. All right. So when we talk about linear warm-up progressions and prep, here's some ideas and some things that we've been working with. When it comes to pogos, I think we just do pogos. I think a lot of people just kind of bounce in place. One of the big mistakes that I see a lot is everyone is just bouncing up on their tippy toes, almost like they're trying to jump rope. And one of the areas you have to focus on is getting the foot to dorsiflex at point of contact, apply force, and then come right back up into dorsiflexion. What I see a lot of flexion at the ankle. And this isn't good when we go back a couple slides and you saw Michael Johnson with his foot. When that foot has to strike the ground, number one, if it's not ready, if it's not in the right position, and it has never done those type of force impacts before, and when we do a low pogo, that's a low amplitude force impact. If we've never done that, it's going to be challenging when you tell a kid to strike the ground hard, whether it be a wall drive drill or a bounding drill or whatever. If they haven't trained that lower leg from the knee down, and we're talking the shank, the ankle, the foot, those muscles to really strike and rebound off the ground, it's going to be tough. And again, it would be like a boxer punching with his wrist not in the right position. We know that would be bad. It's the same thing for pogo. So you really have to get a little anal when it comes to this. And again, you can ask my guys in Sparta that, I drive them nuts. I'm a pogo wacko, and that's all I do with kids is get them to do different versions of pogos. So here's some ideas. Obviously, doing our low pogos like we've always talked about, but extending it. I'm doing sets of 10 to 20 seconds with the kids, dorsiflexion, stiffening the leg, but getting the arms at 90 and pumping them more like they're sprinting, not like they're just kind of pumping your arms up and down, which I know we've always done, but getting them more into a 90-degree angle and getting more movement at the shoulder to get them used to like they're running. It's not going to be opposite arm, opposite leg because both feet we know are moving at the same time, but that force, that vertical force that we're striking straight down should cause the body to go up and get our feet into ankle flexion. So one of the coaching cues I give them is land like you're going to land flat-footed, but your heel would hit like, say, a magazine. So it's just going to be up a couple inches, not even, maybe a half an inch to an inch. And then when they lift off, it's the same thing. What happens is kids wind up getting on their tippy toes. They keep their calves contracted the entire time, and then they're just on their tippy toes. Now the gastroc is just getting pounded, and they're never getting that reaction at the lower body that we want, and they're not prepping that foot, that lower leg ankle complex to strike the ground. Okay, so low pogos, I think that's basic and simple. Now the next one is forward pogos, which if you really think about it, is kind of like doing a bunny hop through a ladder or maybe hopping over hurdles. We've all done those type of movements, but what I want to implore upon you is try to get the kids to do it with a stiffened leg and same deal with the foot. Get the foot to flip up. What you see a lot of is when kids do any type of jumping movements forward, whether it be ladders or jumping over hurdles, anything like that, what I notice is a lot of kids catch themselves. So they use their body weight in essence as momentum, and they're actually catching their feet. So their feet are actually jamming forward on every jump. They're not actually propelling or propulsing their body up in the air. So just look at the normal pogos you do first and then get them to start going forward, as opposed to, okay, just go forward. And it's almost like they're falling down a hill and they're catching themselves. So really get on your kids to make sure they get more vertical. And again, doing the forward movements, especially like this, I'm not worried about them going forward. We all know, and I've said it a million times, if you tell a kid to run 10 yards, all he's concerned with is running 10 yards. He's not worried about what's happening in that 9 yards after he takes off. So same thing with the forward pogos. You're going to have them go 2 to 4 sets, and I made it longer, 15 to 20 yards. So they really have to focus on getting some good height and control in their bodies. If they just try to jump for 15 to 20 yards, they're probably going to fall over and lose themselves, and they're going to be catching their toes. So make sure they get more vertical displacement and keeping their legs straight. What I see too is a lot of kids, when they do any type of force application on a jump, and at the second they strike, they're so worried about rebounding and bringing their knees up that they never fully extend. So if you do more of these pogo movements, it really accentuates that extension and getting the slack out of the knees and out of the hips, as opposed to just doing squat jumps or any of those type of movements, which are awesome movements. But I think there's a disconnect sometimes with the kids. So even if I'm going to progress them eventually to a low, and I'm going to say this again, low hurdle, and have them do some hops, I don't want to see them jumping up and kicking themselves in the butt. And then their knees are down. They're never getting that full extension, that full stiffness, and that full push off. And then moving on, this is a little bit more advanced, is now getting them to do more backwards pogos. Because now when we do these, we're also going to get them to learn how to really push into the ground. If you don't push in a backwards pogo, you're basically going to be Michael Jackson, sliding your feet and going backwards. So again, it gets them to push in a different direction. Obviously, our kids play multiple sports or the field sports where they have to stop and push off and decelerate. So this also starts attacking that as well. And again, you'll see, try to have a kid do backwards pogos without sliding their feet and pushing. 15 to 20 yards will be challenging, and really get them to focus on pushing and getting height, not going backwards. So again, the vertical force is important here as well. And then here's the most advanced one, single leg pogos. And if you can, we want to try to have them do it with the other thigh in the hip flex position. So example, left foot is down, right leg is up, and get them to do those pogos and actually have them do any one of these three. Obviously, a low pogo, single leg is probably your best bet to start. And then eventually you can have them do forward. And then even I have kids now eventually starting to do some backwards pogos. And it's really getting them to get that full extension. And you're putting them in different movement patterns in different areas and see how they progress. It's funny, I've had some kids actually do better with the backwards than they do with the forward, which is kind of crazy. Actually, I'm working at the school that I work at. I have a lot of basketball players at a very high level here, and I did it with them the other day, and the backwards was easier than the forward, because for them, they're used to moving backwards on defense and sliding and things like that. Whereas if you put a track athlete, the backwards is a nightmare for them because they never run backwards. So I think it's always good to do the opposite of what they're used to and challenge them. And it was funny, when I did the forward stuff to the basketball players, they thought it was going to be easy. And to be honest, they struggled. And this is a team with 2 or 3 D1 prospects on it, and they actually struggled with it. So I want you to try these out, do your best. Again, you can mix and match them. I'm not saying this is the exact order. This would just be the progression all the way through, regress back. And again, single leg can be done with any of these. If you need to use any type of external cues, which might be a ladder or a hurdle, I think it's great. But I would say in the beginning, stay away from those, because in my mind, if you're doing these and these are more rapid and explosive movements, if you put too many of those constraints out in front of them, then again, as an external cue, they focus on those constraints a little too much. I'm not worried about distance or height, really. I mean, I want height, but I'm not that concerned. So that's why I kind of like the yardage or the seconds, because then it just gets them to focus on what they need to do. So those are just my thoughts on pogos. Again, I know I'm a pogo nut, but really try to use them in these different manners, and I think you'll see some good results, okay? So training versus drilling, I know this is always probably the biggest topic in our industry. What drills are we doing? What drill is going to fix their technique? And if you're at the summit last year, I kind of hammered this home, and I'm going to hammer it again. The drills are great, but how are they affecting your training is what I'm always going to ask you. And I'm going to use the A drills kind of as our guide to start. So when we talk about an A drill, again, it was invented by Gerard Mach. He was a Canadian sprint coach back in the 70s. Even a little bit in the 80s. Came from Poland originally. So if you think about it, he was in Poland, he was in Canada, and he was training sprinters. So really, if you think about it, their preseason is the winter. They could not go outside. So a lot of these drills came out of him figuring out ways that he could train his sprinters indoors. And that's the reason why I came up with a lot of these drills. It wasn't necessarily to exactly fix their technique. It was allowing them to, number one, get them to, understand what some of the mechanics are, but also strengthening their muscles and rhythmic and higher velocity movements eventually. So if you take the A drill, for example, the knee and the thigh lift is very important for a lot of kids, although we know if you look at the research, it'll say that the timing of it is not that much different. But from a rhythm and a structure standpoint, especially for a young kid, they need to understand what that means. So doing a march, a skip, or a run with any of these movements, and again, you can mix and match what you think is right, getting them just to drive their thigh at the same time, getting their other leg to extend and lock out is important. So even though the lift is what might be one of the focuses are, and that might be more their front side mechanics. Really, the big deal here is the push off and getting the slack out. So, for example, if they're driving their right knee up at the same time, their left leg is extending. And are they getting the extension on the leg? So what happens is, I think as coaches, our coach's eye goes to this. We'll look at, okay, they're doing a skip drill. Great, he's getting his knees up really high. But what's happening on the other leg? Are they pushing off on the other leg? And you're going to see this is where a lot of the kids struggle. A lot of kids, you tell them to lift the knee up. I mean, it's kind of an easy cue. Most kids will get it fairly quickly. This part here, you'll tend to see the foot will flatten out, the ankle will give, the knee will start to flex a little too much. You'll see some flexion at the hip. We don't want to see that. We want to see that full extension. So when you're putting them through these drills, remember the goal is to train them, not to drill them. And look what's happening on the other side. It's not always one side. And again, this is really, for me, the end result. So any marching, skipping, running I do, I want to see what's happening on the other leg. It's easy to lift your knees. It's harder to strike the ground. So hopefully that gets you thinking a little bit differently. And then we'll talk a little bit about the B drill, which we know is more that kick out or casting. And this is where it gets controversial. So we'll kind of talk through this, right? It's a little more front side, a little bit more of a reach and whip. But it's not a overstride. This is where that old school clawing or pawing action has come out. And we know we do fast claw drills, but just remember that it's not how they're running. They're not running like a fast claw drill, and they're not running like a B drill. At the end of the day, it's a special exercise to strengthen the hamstrings. And really, it's two things. Not just them striking the ground. We know when they strike the ground, they're going to get more of an eccentric load on the hamstring, but also too, when they have to whip that leg out, the hamstring acts as a decelerator to slow that leg down. And that is going to get stronger by doing these drills, the marching and the skipping. If they do a lot of these, going back to what I said about Gerard Mock, that's going to help prepare them when they have to go out and sprint at full speed. We've all seen it, unfortunately. We probably had a kid or a team or whatever. The kid goes to sprint the first time, hasn't sprinted maybe in months, boom, and then there goes the hammy. Because that eccentric load, they're just not ready for it yet. And this B drill will really start helping with that. It's not necessarily a technique drill. It's really a special exercise to strengthen the hamstrings. So I know some people said, well, you never should do the B drill because it's not how you run. I agree. It's definitely not how you run exactly, but it serves a lot of purposes as well. So my question to you always is, if you're going to do a drill, what is your main goal? What is your main purpose? What are you trying to accomplish? And a lot of times we know this is an area of emphasis for a lot of our kids. We all know when kids come in, we know they're weak. That's simple. I mean, we wouldn't technically even have to test anybody. We know kids need to get stronger. These are the ways they're getting more of that special strength. And to be honest, you really can't train this in the weight room. It's very challenging to train these type of movements at these velocities, at these rhythms in the weight room. What the weight room does is support it. So if you look at the weight room, really builds the car and gets the car nice. This is now learning how to drive that car and really how to make the turns and decelerate and re-accelerate, right? That's the driver's responsibility. That's not the car's responsibility. The weight room is the factory. Now we get out on a track, right? And then you have to drive the car. Okay. So the problem for running fast is not just applying more force, but more force in shorter time and in the right direction. So I know it's an issue, right? We've talked about this now for months and for years, and really getting people to understand how to apply force. But one of the solutions is you have to prepare them for the next stance leg before initial contact. So if you go back to what I was saying a little earlier on, like say a typical A or B skip or march, when they're lifting that leg up, they have to be in a position to whip from the hip. And this is a term that I picked up a couple years ago at one of the clinics I was at. John Pryor, Franz Bosch, really great sprint coaches. And I just like that analogy. And it's funny, I've used an analogy similar to this, which I'm going to show in a slide or two, to get you to understand that the hip is really the prime mover when it comes to sprinting. That's what's really helping your leg attack the ground. And what you'll see a lot of is if people think they have to attack the ground, they stomp with their feet. If someone says, hey, stomp down, you're thinking, okay, I have to get my foot down, as opposed to getting the hip more into the action. And then at point of contact, I'm going to show you, this is Tyreek Hill here, who I think is just an amazing runner. I love watching him play football. Look at the extension he's getting out of this back leg right here. That all came from this hip getting into position, number one, on that front side mechanic, but number two, now when he attacks the ground down, this lower part of the leg is not doing the action or the work. The hip is the end of the whip, this is what's driving this into the ground. And then like we talked about, going back to our pogo jumps, now we've created a stiffer lower leg and an ankle and a foot that's ready to respond off the ground. Then everything hopefully comes together and the kid can run fast. So I'm hoping this is starting to click and make a little sense. So when we get over here, this will kind of break it down a little. I'm going to jump down here to one of my favorite movies of all time, Indiana Jones. And we all know his weapon of choice was the whip. So when you take a whip, really the end of the whip doesn't do the work. It's the handle. So all the energy is created from the handle. So Harrison Ford over here is firing a lot of energy into that handle. That energy now travels down the whip. At the end of the whip, bang, snap. That's where it happens, right? So if you think about your leg, this is the handle. So this is your hip. The energy travels down your leg. There's your lower part of your leg. Then bang, that's the pop. That's the hit into the ground. And that's really what is helping you project your hips out. So I'm kind of going backwards here for a second, but I want you to see now this leg is ready to strike the ground. That hip is what's going to whip and drive this leg down and get them into what we call more of a hip lock. And see, if you look on her right here, that's Allison Felix. Her hip is basically locked out. That is full hip extension. She already toed off. She's projecting her hips out, and she obviously, hopefully, maximized her ground forces. And it's more of a pushing and piston type action. It just really depends on the direction that you're running and what phase that you're running in. So when it comes to acceleration and top speed, if you think about my first slide, there's not that much of a difference. The biggest difference is where you are in your race or in your sprint and what angles you're at. If you're in acceleration, the angle we know is going to be more 45 degrees, and it's going to be a real pushing, foot lower to the ground, piston action. As you rise up and you drive your body taller, that piston action is still there, but we all know there's going to be a little more of a recovery phase, more of a fold at the knee. But the action, the mechanic of the push is really what is key. It is not a whip out and extension and come down. The whip is happening from the hip, and then that leg is coming down, going back to Indiana Jones here. So hopefully for you youngins, you know who Indiana Jones is. If you don't, go watch it on Netflix. All right. So the next thing is swing and scissor. It's the stretch and tension and then attack. So if you look at, I'm a superhero nerd, so I love Captain America. If you look at the hip right here, there's a scissoring action that's going on. You can definitely see it with the arms, right? We all know opposite arm, opposite leg. But if you look, this knee is swinging up, that leg is extending back. That's like a scissor action. And if you ever take your scissors and try to open them up as much as you can, try to get them as far apart as you can, that's exactly what's happening with your legs. It's that scissor action. So it's not the closing of the scissor, it's the opening. We're trying to open up and get as much distance between this knee and this back knee. The more lift we get, the better position we are to whip that leg back down. And then we'll also see, like we saw in the previous slide, them getting the extension on that back leg or getting into that hip lock position. So when you're watching a kid run, don't just look at the upper body. Look at the action of the lower body. Number one, are they getting extension on both legs every time they strike the ground? Are the knees separated? And we talk about this in acceleration a lot, the separation of the thighs. And when they attack the ground, are they in a position to lift and then whip it right back down? Okay. So here's a little video of Usain Bolt running at slow speeds. So it's a really cool video. I found it on YouTube. And what I want you to watch is some of the concepts I talk about as far as the lift and the whip. And you're going to see these guys are elite sprinters. So it looks like this guy right here, it looks like he's overstriding. Watch where the foot makes contact. The reason why it looks like he's overstriding is because he's able to project his hips out far enough and then get that foot down. And because of that whipping action, elite level sprinters do kick their leg out a little bit further than a normal sprinter, kind of like that B skipping or marching. It's not something we're necessarily going to teach, but you'll see it with these elite sprinters. But watch when they push off the ground, watch that scissor action, and watch them locking out and getting a slack out. So I'm just going to play this. It's about a minute long here. And you can find this on YouTube, so feel free to hop on YouTube one day and check it out. So. Okay, so I'm going to freeze it for a second. All right, so if you look at Bolt right here, look at the hip. That's definitely locked out. Look at the extension he got, the toe off. His hips are projected out. That's his max efficiency. The front side mechanic, that lift is coming up, and now he's in a position to strike the ground. There's a little bit more of that vertical force that we always talk about, although at toe off, you're going to see there is a little horizontal, so he can propel and push his body forward. Also, look at his posture compared to some of the other guys. Look at this guy curved, This guy's actually a little bit curved. This is why Bolt was so effective. And to this day, I'm always going to use him in videos because his ability to maintain that posture and apply force was amazing. A lot of people, when they have to sprint at high speeds, after a while, they do start to break down because their body just can't handle it. And the breakdowns tend to occur first in the upper body, and then we know that will translate down to the lower body. So I want to just kind of keep playing that a little bit. There's no movement up top with him. You look at this guy in the back. Look how much excess movement he has when he strikes. And there is a recover on the front side. Leg up, whip down, strike. Leg up, whip down. And it's not a pulling action. It's a driving. That knee is extending just about at or when it hits the ground. And you can see these guys over here. Like this guy, he's almost overstriding now because he's trying to maintain and beat Bolt, where Bolt's body position really has not changed. And notice the foot is in the dorsiflex position when it's about to hit. After it hits, full extension and push off. So going back to the pogos, that will help with a lot of this foot striking that happens. Okay. Okay, so I want to show you I'll go back for a second. We go here. I want to show you a sample training session that you can do with linear speed. Just kind of go through a little, give you guys some ideas. Hopefully this will pull up quickly. We'll get this back to here. So at this point, I'm going to stop for a second. Does anybody have any questions as I'm pulling this up? Anybody want to chime in? Okay. Okay, so here's okay. There you go.
Yeah, it's not like a real question. I just wanted to know if you're discussing something and as you say something, do you want us to just save it for the end, like after the presentation, or would you want us to like ask it right then and there?
No, you guys can, whatever's good for you. This is for you guys. So if you have a question now, let's go.
Okay. I actually don't have a question right now, but just so I know.
You're just prepping me. You're just making sure I'm on point. I like that.
I want to disrupt your like train of thought like when you're going.
I'm old. I lose my train of thought anyway, so don't worry about it. That's why I have a PowerPoint. So, okay. Anyone else though? Anyone else have any questions? I want to just give a quick break to myself, actually. But anyone? Okay. But just chime in if you have any. So, here's the linear speed. This is what we're doing up at Sparta. So, John Novak, Vicky Zolkowski, they're the ones that really, spend a lot of time making sure this stuff gets in there from our library and also making any adjustments and tweaks based upon our clients at the time. So here's an example of a typical day, right? So we have our warm-up, starting out some stationary work, low pogo work. You see the sets of 20 seconds like we talked about. And then I'm going to roll on down here to more the meat and potatoes, doing a full recover, fast claw work, coupling that with some A skips, hands on the hips so we can disassociate the upper from the lower body, getting some air runs in, air runs to a sprint, and then sprints. So if you actually look at it right here, 4, 4, 12, I mean, they're doing 13 sprints. So this is an easy thing to think about, but I think I have to reiterate it all the time. The best way to really get fast and to build good technical models, in my opinion, is make them sprint. They have to sprint. So you can spend all day long doing all these drills here, but we have to make them run. And you always want to follow up what you're doing with a run. You don't want to just do a fold and recover, then a fast claw, then a bound, then another drill. They're just doing drills at that point. They need to do the drill, see what happens, see what type of response comes from it. Did that drill make an effect on them? Did it maybe fix some of their technical model stuff? It could not. Every kid's a little different. Also, too, does it maybe just get them to strike the ground a little harder, or does it get them to increase their stride frequency, or maybe change their body posture? We know there's multiple different things that can happen, but make sure when you're doing those drills that you're always following up with a sprint. And sometimes, or most of the time, I should say, they'll do a drill, they'll go sprint, and you'll be like, what the heck just happened? They just did a drill great, and they didn't do it in the sprint. Remember, when you're doing a drill, it's at a modified or a slower pace. They have time to work on it, and they also get a lot of reps in it. Do the same thing when it comes to a sprint. So if you teach a kid a new drill, we all know it might take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times of doing that drill before they start getting that concept. Well, think about it with a sprint. You just made them do a drill. You just changed their motor pattern for a little bit. That might be something they've never done before. Now you get them to go sprint. Their nervous system's whacked out. They don't even know what's happening. So let them do a couple sprints to kind of readjust and see what happens. And what I've learned more over the years of doing this is I got to shut up more and let them run more. And it's hard as coaches, but at the end of the day, if they do more sprint work, it's a good thing for them. So just make sure you're doing that when you're going through your sessions. Again, all of this can be adjusted. If you feel like 4 is too much that day because it's a young kid or a weak kid or new or whatever, hey, make the adjustment. Drop it down to 2 or 3. Or, you know what? I have a kid who can really handle more. I'm going to bump this up to 5 or 6 and maybe make this 5 or 6.
Yep.
You have that option. So
What are
just
you doing over
Take
here?
it
On
linear speed.
okay. Next is if you look, here's an acceleration workout. Again,
I actually have a quick question now that you just finished that.
okay, good. Who's this?
My name is Kenneth. I'm a coach over in Flemington.
Oh, hey, Ken. How you doing?
Hey. Yeah, so I've heard, so I'm looking down where it says A run and then A run to sprint. Being a track athlete, I also heard them called B runs before. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Is when you're focused on the front side and then you start to like cycle through and gradually open up into a full on sprint?
Well, they're two different drills. So an A run is really the whole drill put together. When it comes to B and the skipping, that's like if you look at the slides earlier, that's more that extension and that whip out. And it's not really a cycling motion. I know that's something that people have always coached. It's more of a striking and a piston-like action. So really, I mean, again, if you want to be technical about it, you know, the B run doesn't necessarily exist. I mean, you can call it a B run, but really the A run is about applying more force. Now, you can have them do an A run with a little more of a recovery focus, so they don't have to think about it. But at the end of the day, once they run and then there's to a sprint, then it's a full sprint at that point. I think unfortunately what has happened over the years is again going back to Gerard Mock. If you want to do some research on him, all his drills have been bad game of telephone, right? It's all been kind of watered down and people have had their own spin on things. And it's not right or wrong. It's just a different way of looking at it. But, you know, the A run into a sprint, it's really how you want to get them to focus. It might be more on the front side or in the recovery, or it might be on the back side and the striking. That's really going to be dependent upon your kids. And guys, too, you know, going off of that, if in your session you have, I'm just making simple math here, if you have 6 kids in your class and 3 kids have tough time recovering, but 3 kids have a tough time striking, give them different focuses, say in an A run. So say, listen, you 3 are going to do the A run, but I want you to focus more on recovery. I'm not as concerned as you striking because you don't have any good front side or any lifting. If you look at the other 3, maybe they got to strike more, so get them to focus on striking more. I think you have to do that more in your sessions. You can't give them the blanket workout. Even though they might be in the same drill, you can give them maybe a little bit more of a different focus. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Sure, no problem. Anyone else? Okay. So again, so here's just the basic layout. So hopefully you guys are using Train Heroic. I know it's been a kind of a slow push for a lot of people to use it. I think part of it is, you know, it's technology and people get afraid of technology. I think part of it too is some locations like to write their own stuff, and I completely understand that. I get it. My suggestion is get on here, download these workouts, put them into your training plan for the month. So as you can see, this was put in for the month of October. It was put in all one shot. As soon as you click a button, it's all put in there. And then my suggestion would be, as you're going through them, if you need to make adjustments based upon your clients and their needs, then go in and make that adjustment. You know, if you say, you know what, I'm not going to do the push-ups with them. I want to do wood weight with them, or I want to do incline sprints with them. Okay, then make that adjustment. You know, swap one thing out, swap one thing in. I think that's great. You know, and again, you might have different equipment that other locations don't have. Definitely do that. But I think what I've been seeing is, I visit locations almost every month, is I see people that will put in some different type of movements that may or may not necessarily fall in line with, you know, what you're doing for that day. So hopefully you guys can do that. And also too, for your older athletes and your peak and your teams, if you guys need to create your own workouts, feel free to do that, you know, but use these as your guide. My suggestion is take these, copy and paste them, and then use them as your guide, if that makes sense to everybody. So any questions on that? We're good? Okay, so let's go over here. Okay, so no other questions on Train Heroic? All right, so the last thing here is, it kind of came up too quick, but, stay hyped on what's going on. And, we know the kids now are playing Fortnite, and that's the new thing for the kids. I put this up here as a joke, kind of laugh a little bit. But if you actually look at this goofy thing that all the kids are doing now, that's single leg height movement, whatever you want to call it. I actually make the kids do that now in my classes because I love doing it. So I make them do it forward, I make them do it backwards, make them do it sideways. And what are they getting? They're getting single leg working, and they think they're doing the Fortnite dance. So just try to have a little bit of fun with them. Okay. And last part, let's open this up to questions. I know this was about 35 minutes or so. I really want you guys to interact and ask me questions. I don't want to just give you a full hour presentation. So what questions you guys have, comments, concerns, anything. So please feel free. Come on, somebody's got to say something.
You're all unmuted too, so you should be able to hop right in any questions you have. No? You're too.
How about this? Was this helpful? Or Steve, you're an idiot. You can say whatever you want. Feel free. See?
All right. Well, we don't have any questions. I guess we can wrap it up early. Or Steve, if there's any other just random topics you want to kind of go on, anything going on you think that the rest of the network should know?
I think if there's anything else I want. That's the basics. Again, I don't want to give you guys too much. I just want you to think about every drill you're doing. Are you incorporating, what I basically talk about there? Is that happening in your drills? That's why I don't want to give you a million drills, because you got to figure out what works for your, for your place. But also too, when you put these programs together and you're working with these kids, take a step back sometimes and look at what's happening, with the legs, and do you see improvement there? Don't fall in love with new drills all the time. Although you can constantly change them. If you look at all those marches, skips, runs, if you put in any type of resistance, whether it be PVC pipes, aqua bags, sandbags, med balls, anything like that, that's going to change the movement pattern for them possibly, right? And we don't want to change it, but it's going to force them to maybe readjust, change their stability, change their posture. Also, too, it's also going to incorporate some co-contractions when we talk about getting the core to contract and then getting the leg to contract at the same time, which we know is very, very challenging for a lot of our kids. So I would definitely like you guys to think about that a little more. But, Carol, how many people are on the call, actually?
We have 6 people on right now.
All right, so we have a short group. So I'm going to go do a little round table. Give me what problems you guys are having. Just go around. Anyone just jump in. What problems are you having when it comes to linear speed? And I would venture to guess it's probably top speed. So just pick out one thing that you're having a struggle with.
Kenny, I'm going to pick on you first since you're the only one who's been talking so far. What's a problem you have?
I would say, well, generally when you're talking linear speed, it's always hard getting the jump starts to, as far as acceleration goes, like fully push and get full extension, as Steve was saying, like full extension at the hip. That's the biggest thing for jump starts. I find it really difficult to. Steve was saying, I think it really applies to jump starts as well, as like less coaching, more sprinting. Like as far as jump starts go, I don't ever really go into the whole mechanics of top speed. I just try to get them to get that piston action, emphasize that piston action out front more. So getting a higher thigh drive, so then they'll be in a higher position to put more force into the ground, and hopefully that will open them up. As far as like our older kids, assuming there's no like mobility issues, we have some kids that have super tight hips, and just it's been a process just trying to open up their hips so they're even able to hit those new positions when they run. And I think that's where the skips really do justice. I think that like doing the A skips, doing those marches, having them hit those positions while moving instead of just like holding a static stretch, I think that's gonna help them. Kind of lost my train of thought there.
Well, I think what you're going with, and if I could just jump in for a second, is that there's a big, if a kid is tight in their hips, right? We all know they're tight in their hips. There's a difference between static flexibility and mobility, right? So
Yes.
mobility is movement throughout the joint. So doing movements like skipping and marching, whatever, that is creating mobility at the hip joint. So we have to do more of that. I mean, to be honest, a lot of static stretching, it's going to help a little, but I mean, I've been doing static stretching for years, and I never see a difference, in the hips. It's more of an active movement. If you tell me right now to stretch, I can barely touch my toes. You tell me to do different speed movements at 45, I still can do them because it's an active movement for me. And really, that's how these kids are trained. They're not static. So hopefully that helps you guys a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, like, to kind of backpack off of that, I would say that's our biggest problem is getting, especially the older kids, to have that like bigger frontside mechanics and that piston action out front. And I think as we continue to incorporate the skips and those A runs and those marches and really emphasizing on the frontside mechanics and then the dorsiflexion at the lower the ankle, I think that's just where we need to keep going to improve our older level athletes. But I mean, yeah, that's what I would say as far as problems go that I've seen is jump starts, getting them to fully push when they accelerate, and then for the older kids those frontside mechanics that getting bigger out front to allow them to put a lot of force into the ground.
Yep. Awesome, cool. All right, who else is on the call?
We got Heather on. Heather, you were just at certification week not too long ago, right?
Yeah, we haven't opened yet, so I've just been jumping on just to continue the education and be ready. Hopefully we'll be open in about 2 weeks.
Very awesome. Any questions you had from certification week or anything that Steve has talked about? I know you guys aren't running it yet, but anything come to mind?
No, not yet. I'm sure once I get in the middle of it, it actually a lot of stuff I learned from certification and just kind of some of these calls has kind of helped with coaching soccer, just trying to think differently, kind of getting me to think on, different levels or different ways to communicate with kids. So it's been helpful in that way into other things I'm doing right now.
Good. Glad to hear it.
I'm sure I'll have questions once we open.
Awesome. All right. Anybody else on? Anybody have any other questions for Steve? All right. I think we're good. Any last thoughts, Steve?
No, I mean, I appreciate you guys getting on. I mean, listen, the people get on these all the time. I know some of you are the same ones. I think it's great. I mean, listen, it's the only way you're going to get better. I know this is going to be recorded, so if you want to go listen to it again, feel free. But please try to apply a lot of these thoughts and techniques as much as you can. I think that's the biggest key. And, do your best with it. If you have questions, shoot me an email. I'm a lot better at getting back to you on email than calls. Just, I teach during the day as well to school, so I'm not always around, but I can get back to stuff late at night. And I did have one question, if you guys want to jump in. And Kara and I have talked about this a little bit. Would you guys prefer that we did this call? Maybe I did it more of like a live video stream where actually I could show some of this stuff. Maybe have an athlete or something like that, or even pre-record it and show some of these movements a little bit more like a Facebook Live type thing. Is that something that would interest you guys, or do you like this format better?
Go ahead and jump in, anybody, if you have thoughts.
This is Heather. I like the idea of being able to see you apply the mechanics to somebody else.
Yeah, perfect. It definitely won't be me doing it, put it that way.
Yeah.
This is Nicole. I like that idea too, just so like we have reference and also we can look at it later when we're trying to kind of review and look at what we learned and discuss it. So it's helpful having that visual.
Okay, cool. Anyone else? All right, well, Karen and I'll talk about it. I have a couple certs coming up as well. We have a New Jersey one coming up in November, and then also this month I'm actually going to Vermont for regional. So my thought was even when I'm at those, I might film a few of these portions of it a little more live and then post them and then see what you guys think and then kind of go from there. I think it'll be a little bit more. It won't be interactive, but it might be a little bit better to kind of see it that way. Because I know me, same thing. I'm a visual learner, so that would help me.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you everybody for getting on. And like you said, this will be up in the online resource center. If you have any other coaches who weren't able to make it today, we'll put it in there right after we get off here. All right. Thanks, guys.
No problem. Thank you.